With the world in a state of unprecedented flux, the Americas, at least, as I call them as a colonialist, are being confronted with a binary decision: Trump or Biden. What difference will it really make? I know people that are ardent supporters of either of those candidates will be outraged that that question could even be asked. People on the left regarding Trump as an anomalous and unprecedented monster, people on the right regarding Biden as a man in cognitive decline, a career politician who's been present in one form or another during a raft of decisions that would immediately undermine any attempt to assert that he's a meaningful alternative for the kind of static bipartisan democracy that most of us that are my age, or God, even less than 100 years old, are kind of used to. Let's have a look at some of the notorious pledges that Biden has made. 20 reasons to vote for Biden. Now, this might sort of seem to you positive, and in a way I think there are elements of this that are positive, but it also, I think, is an indication of how low the expectations are of ordinary people, of political leaders. Like that, what do we really expect from politicians? Do we really expect a radically different world? My view, before I get into actual data, just speculating and shooting from the hip, is that in Joe Biden, there is a man who's been present for 8 years in Obama's administration, which, whilst it generated a lot of enthusiasm and had some landmark moments, and Obama is an appealing and charismatic leader, ultimately, when you look at all of the major issues that took place during that administration, you couldn't regard it as anything other than a disappointment with, for example, his attitude towards whistleblowers, which has been discussed brilliantly and at length on Joe Rogan's podcast with Glenn Greenwald, the situation in Ferguson, the ongoing drone strikes, in a sense, it was a disappointing administration. But let's have a look at some of these pledges. Free COVID tests, okay, premium free healthcare for low-income families, that would be a good thing. Cancel 10,000 in debt for students, that would be good. 5 million clean energy jobs, eliminate carbon pollution by 2035, necessary, absolutely necessary, too little, too late. Equal pay for women, $15 of federal minimum wage, higher taxes on the 1% and big corporations, decriminalise marijuana, end mass deportation, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, end gerrymandering, bring all troops home from Afghanistan, ban and buy back assault weapons, codify Roe versus Wade, protect access to birth control. Now, there's nothing on there that gives me any pause for thought, but then I'm not an American citizen, and I don't have the kind of affinity for arms ownership that many American people have. But I suppose where my particular perspective comes from is a person who is, broadly speaking, disenchanted with mainstream politics and has been for a long, long while. And however you regard Trump, it's difficult not to regard Biden as a career politician that represents the sort of worst kind of institutional, insipid, ineffectual politics of the last 50, 60 years. That this is a person that's not taken a stand in, none of these things took place during government. Of course, all the COVID stuff wouldn't have been relevant, but the codifying of Roe versus Wade, for example. So I guess what I'm saying, and I suppose it's worth pointing out again that it's not an election that I'm able to vote in, that I wouldn't have expectations of radical change. And the thing that seems really significant to me is, regardless of the result of this election, we're likely to see uprisings, unrest and dissatisfaction. In the event that Joe Biden wins this election, where do the people that voted for Donald Trump go? Where do they disappear to? I was thinking earlier today that the kind of vilification and rather reductive dismissal, along the lines of basket of deplorables, famous Hillary Clinton critique, is that there's been a kind of vilification, and a comparable thing happened in the country I live in, the UK, around Brexit, of a kind of insulting dismissal of a large percentage of the population, which in a way calls to mind that the kind of widespread condemnation of Muslims in times where terrorism is high on the agenda. I know it is in sort of France, for example, at the moment, but elsewhere, COVID and this election dominates the news cycle. What I'm saying is this: when you're dealing with numbers this large, 30 million, 50 million, 60 million people, that you can't be dismissive of people. You can't be dismissive of the needs that drive people in those types of in that direction. If Trump wins again, what does it say here? If Trump wins, well, the right will feel even more empowerment. Like myself, I suppose, I don't have a strong opinion on the outcome. I've never felt inclined to align myself with a neutered, centrist, pseudo-leftist movement, because I believe that there is a possibility for real meaningful change, a different type of politics which gives people access to the decisions that affect their lives and to the resources that would improve their lives. I'm no longer confident that it can happen within the parameters of an antiquated system that was set up for a population and a civilization centuries ago, with different requirements, different needs, and different means for expressing will. I think we're holding on to a lot of old ideas that no longer serve us. And while, what my opinions are on Donald Trump would probably be obvious to anyone, I don't feel a great deal of optimism about the alternatives we're being offered. If the world, can you even say that? If the world is, do you not get a sense that this is an insane time, an insane and unusual and disrupted time that's crying out for some meaningful and realistic change, crying out for something a little more radical than moving the dial 5%, 10% in either direction within institutions that don't meaningfully alter? That's why I can't generate any real enthusiasm for either outcome, because of my ongoing belief that it is possible for human beings to live differently on this planet, to create new systems, to relate to each other in different ways. And whilst I recognise that for a lot of people this is a very important election, for me it remains a further demonstration of the current lack of meaningful alternatives and meaningful ideas that might create the kind of society, the kind of systems that are required if we're to avert ecological disaster and the kind of impending spiritual crisis that many people are feeling in a very real, very raw way already.